Hello, everyone. I'm Gemma Star, and welcome to another episode of Heart Warriors. Heart Warriors is a series I've been guided and inspired to do thanks to my energetic connection with Kata Judah, this beautiful sacred masculine rock formation behind me, which is very close to Uluru, our sacred feminine side. So, what I'm here to do is to do 100 shows where men articulate their journey into the heart, their highs, their lows, tools, practices, insights, wisdom. What can each man bring from their own personal experience to share, to tell their story of how they got from rock bottom through their challenges and into the heart warrior that they are today? We talk about individual experiences, tools, wisdom, insight, knowledge. What can each man bring to the series? So, of course, we have 100 different men and 100 different stories, and there'll be something for every man to relate to. Today's guest is a man called Paul Luftenegger. Now, Paul is a multi-award winning singer and songwriter. He's also a doctor of ministry and a Heal Your Life teacher. He writes songs as powerful, conscious music, always supporting the sacred heart and soul to know its beauty and divine holy worth from the inside out. So, really looking forward to chatting with Paul today and hearing all about his journey into the heart. Enjoy. Hello, Paul Luftenegger. Welcome to Heart Warriors. So good to have you here. How are you?
I'm great. I'm excited to share some time with you and everyone uniting.
And you told me you're there in Bermuda.
Yeah, so we're in Bermuda right now at the tip of I always say it's the apex of the Bermuda Triangle. Yep.
How's the energy there?
It's really beautiful. It's been so Bermuda has a special place. My husband actually is from Bermuda, so it's a special place, alchemically, but also because him being from here. So it's very special. Yeah.
Oh, so good. Great. Well, let's get into your story and hear all about how you became the heart warrior that you are today. Um, to give us some insight into you, Paul, how would you describe yourself if you were to let go of all your outside labels?
Well, this is an interesting question, and I've watched a few of your other shows, so it's been interesting watching other men share what this is to them. And in this moment, I knew that I would have this moment with you. So I think just if I just drop everything away, is I'm really my soul, and my soul being. I always say that I'm not from Earth; I'm visiting. And I came here, I'm very galactic. I came here to support Earth. And ultimately, I feel like I come from God and I am with God and I will always return to God. So that's my soul and that's who I am.
That's beautiful. I have a little joke when I say I came to Earth. I say I came for the chocolate.
That's true. I've heard someone else say, I think I know one other person that said that something of the same similarity, and I get it.
Yeah. Oh, so good. All right. Well, let's go back to little Paul. What was his major challenge growing up?
Well, I had sort of a unique, I had a beautiful childhood, so I'm very blessed to have, I think, the cocoon of love in my childhood. Um, and, the challenge that I had when I was a kid really started. I actually had my tonsils and my adenoids out when I was probably around like 6 or 7. And my mom noticed that I was stopping, like literally breathing when I would sleep. So she's quite concerned about this. But after, it's almost like I didn't have an interest in food until she actually sort of did this thing with my tonsils and adenoids. And what happened is I started to love food because I could taste it, I think. And so I like ate so much food and I got a little chunky. And it was really, really, looking back at it, the innocence of it is so beautiful, but it gave me a really big awareness of body image. And it was quite devastating for a while just how people would treat me, being a little bit, I was always the fat kid. And I think what's really interesting about that is, as I've gotten older, I recognize, it's made me love my body in a very different way as a temple. And I'm very grateful for the experience, but it was very hard growing up with so much consciousness placed upon the body being, unacceptable to the standard. So it was challenging. Yeah.
Oh, so how did little Paul cope with that? And what age are we talking about? How long did that last? I mean, you look pretty good now.
Yeah. It was pretty much like around, I think around, in the vicinity of around 9, 8 and 9 years old, kind of is where that started to happen. And I had left, we grew up in a really small little town. And then we moved to a bigger city when I was around that age. And I think moving schools, they didn't know who I was. So, the judgments come in, and it was, it was a beautiful sort of experience though, too. And I think I'm actually grateful for all of it. So it's perfect.
Yeah, yeah. But as a little boy and you getting that judgment, did that
Yeah.
like did that make you want to get back to, sort of a weight that you were happier with? Or did that, but you said it maybe got you interested into understanding the mechanics of food. How did that play out?
Well, I think what's really interesting, one of the things that men don't talk about very often is body image and the insecurity of things. So it's made me very aware that there's a lot of things that men don't talk about. And I think a lot of men struggle with this just like women do, but in a totally different way. And you know, as you go through school, one of the things that's very common is you have to take your shirt off when you're a guy, right? So I remember in high school, you would do shirts, and I can't even remember what it was called now, but you'd have to take off your shirt, and there would be shirts and shirtless or whatever they call it. And I remember in school, I used to worry about this so much, but I remember in phys ed class in high school in Canada, which is where I grew up, was very much like they would separate the girls and the boys. It was just boys in our phys ed class, and it was very interesting to me. It was probably the only time where I was ever with all guys that way. It was a unique experience, but the all of the dynamics of just the things that men, I think, don't talk about. And I always felt really self-conscious when I would take off my shirt. I still do actually to this day, but it's given me a hyper awareness of, I think, just something that most people don't think about. But I also think women think about it all the time. So it's made me very sensitive to that aspect of women as well. So it's kind of a balancing thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Paul, I'm really keen for you to talk to parents of children who would be considered overweight. And obviously, it's a growing theme in our world with, a more sedentary lifestyle plus add on, the availability of junk food. And I mean, I work with children and I see a lot of the parents and the children struggling with this. But from your perspective, that you were once in their shoes, what would you say to those parents to be able to help their kids?
That's a really big question. And what's so important is I think that people that are parents need to remember that children are very fragile. Of course, they're very strong, but they're also very fragile to how we deal with our own bodies. So I will share my mother's a little bit, on the full figured side, let's say. But at the same time, I think that what is very important to sort of do when you're dealing with a child is to remember that whatever you're teaching them about body image or whatever you're talking about in terms of the way you feel about your body, they're sponges, so they absorb it. And I think just to be mindful of first of all the words you use, and to be very careful, to be very mindful is maybe a better word, of how you sort of navigate this, because you can really I had a beautiful I had beautiful parenting this way, and it was never an issue from my parents ever. And they loved me for who I was. And I think that if you can instill self-love and self-worth into your children, I think eventually that will take care of itself. So I think just to embrace and to model behavior as well. So to eat well yourself, and to sort of never make an issue out of food, I think ultimately.
Yeah. To let them eat what they want, basically, or to try
Yeah,
and
pretty. I
control
would
it.
I would actually say that, yes, because if you start making it an issue, it becomes an issue that's even more of an issue. It's almost like it would grow bigger in my mind. So I have to say, and I think that like anything, you take the initiative that just is, to be active and to be physically fit that way from your own perspective, and just to eat the way that you eat normally. But I would say not to make an issue of food, actually. Yeah.
Do you think it always comes from an underlying emotional issue, that there's something emotional going on that is being fulfilled by food?
By food. Well, I think it certainly could be that. And I also think one of the things that I mean, if you think about just the way that we were raised, I grew up, so on my dad's side, she's Austrian, so German Austrian, sort of, culturally speaking. And so food was a way to love, right? So it was very much, food, everything was about food. And we actually owned food stores, we had food businesses. So everything was about food when I was a kid. And the thing that, when you look at these sorts of parts of my life, and that food was always shoved into our face to love you. And I think we, even if a baby's crying, you put a bottle in their mouth, right? Like, I mean, there's other ways to soothe. So I think just to be mindful of the way you soothe when you have a child. So, to maybe do some other soothing options other than food. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good, because we can replace food with love, right? Very easily.
Love, absolutely.
Yeah.
Or a reward of, doing something that's positive, or positive action, or,
Yeah,
you know,
treat. How
yeah,
often if you do that, you get a treat and it's a food reward. Yeah, such
exactly.
great insights. Thanks, Paul. Let's move on to your adulthood. So we're looking for that rock bottom moment that sent you on your path to becoming the man you are today. What would that be, and what was happening?
Well, the man that I am today, when you may you ask that maybe ask that question one more time. What was your question exactly again?
Your rock bottom moment as an adult.
As an adult, okay. So my rock bottom moment, so for sure, without question, is my father's suicide. Um, I've never, um, I mean, there's really no words for that, really, that moment. And it's a rock bottom moment where I realized if I didn't sort of take care of myself, I was definitely going to be in trouble. And it was also a moment of where I feel very much that God came into my life upon praying. I've always been with God. So, right from the time I touched down, and I was the kid that asked a billion questions. But when my father died, my whole life has been very much with God. So, I have always had dialogue with God my whole life. Um, I would actually say that God is my best friend all through my life. So when my father took his own life, I was 30. I had turned 34 the year that he transitioned. So just to put an age on it, and I'm now 46. So just to kind of give a timeline. But when my father died, what's very interesting is that that day changed my life, because, and not just that day, but the space of grief out of that insanity was very, very challenging. And I have to say, what it also did is it built so much strength in me that I now can see. But at the time, I was so uncertain of this world. I wasn't sure if I could be in it, to be quite frank. I wasn't sure if I could get through such a thing. And I think to witness someone hanging by a rope is how my father took his own life. I've never. It was such a bizarre juxtaposition where the person that gave you your life left your life that way. It was very intense. And my mother and I both found my father, and I was visiting their home. I think he had planned his suicide. But one of the things, I mean, it took me a very long time to be able to talk about it without, I mean, I could cry at any given time and I'm okay with that, but I can talk about it much more without having to get that emotional, that drawing emotion.
Oops, lost you, Paul. And we're back. Paul's internet went out, and we think it was his dad saying hello, and very
Yeah,
grateful for this conversation. So we're back
exactly.
anyway. Paul, I'd really like to delve further into this conversation, if I may, because we haven't touched on this in all. I think you're number 85, 86, Heart Warrior. And it's one thing for the death of a parent through illness, where it's, event expected, another through accident where you can put a solid reason on it, but very different, I imagine, to go through suicide, where you're not just dealing with the grief of the death, but all the reasoning behind it and the way they chose. I mean, to me, to choose to hang yourself, that you and your mum found him, is a huge statement, to actually choose that way. Can you please open up this discussion, just keeping in mind we're talking to maybe people who have been through a suicide themselves and, trying to find their own peace with it?
Well, I think what's really interesting about suicide, and I can talk about this really differently than I used to be able to, is one of the things I should mention is also my father's father took his own life. And also, from what I understand, my grandfather actually took his own life. Like, so his grandfather would have taken his own life, my great grandfather. Um, and so being a male in a succession of that was very unique. And I also recognize that it comes from war. So suicide and war for me would be the connection. So I think just, the part of it that's the psychology of it is something that I've had to think a lot about and reflect and contemplate. And I also believe that it's written into the fabric of life because you do have free will. And I think it proves it in a way, actually. So I think if anybody doesn't wish to be on this planet, actually, it's a choice. It's a choice to live every day. And I think that, there's times in your life where everybody has had some version of a suicidal sort of experience, whether it be, third party or close up in a family. And I think in the past it wasn't talked about openly. I think that there's a huge understanding um, now about what that may even look like from a different perspective because we're much more willing to talk about things. And it's interesting. When we what happens when you have a suicide, there's a couple of things that are very unique. One of the things, so in our country, the number that you call when you have an emergency is 911, and it's, in different countries it's different for the emergency services. And the thing that they ask you to do is they ask you to cut down the body. And I have to tell you, it's something that I have never thought about. And I remember with my mother, I mean, we knew my father was dead. It was very obvious from the way he looked. But we hadn't considered that that would be something that we would have had to have done. And at the same time, it made perfect sense. Of course, you would do that. But it didn't even cross our mind, because you're in shock. And the thing that's very interesting is weathering up how to even navigate that because you're so confused. And it's almost like it's like a different paradigm because it's like you can't make sense of it. Like it was just, there was so much confusion and it was so fast. So we had emergency services on the phone. They were guiding us through it. And I remember it seemed like it took so long to figure out what to do, and to go to the kitchen to try to find a knife, and like everything was slow motion. It was so weird. But then when we finally got to sort of the situation, the ambulance, sorry, the fire department had actually come first, and they sort of ushered in. And I remember hearing the sirens, and I remember thinking the angels are coming, right? And they came in just these big, beautiful saviors in many ways that of handling something that I couldn't and my mother couldn't really handle. And they came in and just took over. And it also was a moment where I saw humanity and dignity come together to care for life and the people that were living it. So, I mean, I can't imagine doing that job. So it really gave me a really great understanding and perspective on how much human beings actually do help other human beings. And I think just suicide is such an envelope or a container that is oftentimes so judged. And the thing I can say with my father was a beautiful man. He was 56 years old, just before his 57th birthday. He was very well liked, very well loved. But I think he was just done with this planet. And for me, I also think it says a lot about society when a human being no longer wishes to participate in this planet. Perhaps we might want to consider why. Why wouldn't a human being want to be on the planet? And it's a great question because I think a lot of people, if they haven't said it out loud, I think some people certainly feel that way. And I think for me, it gave me a great insight of that that question and that answer that most people don't ever really talk about. But I do think that, we're supposed to learn from every life. So I think that that doesn't exclude suicides. In fact, I think it actually should be about suicide a bit more. And perhaps we need to do some things differently to support life very differently than we have. Because for a soul to want to leave here, who knows what would have happened if that soul stayed? So I think that there's a great question and answer sort of that has to happen in reflecting on what life is in suicide.
Yeah, and we're going to get deeper into that. You as being a minister and with your experience and teachings, but I don't want to forget the link that you put together regarding war. So you
Mhm.
said that all through your last three generations that you'd put down war as being the common theme. Can you expand on that, please?
Yeah, so my grandfather and my grandmother were from Austria. And so my grandmother was, I think, 8 years old when the war started with Hitler. And this was a very obviously a very weird childhood to most people that we know, unless you're from a war kind of childhood. And it gave me an awareness. And I don't think I ever really looked at it so closely until my father died. We always sort of knew. But my grandmother, from the time she was 8 until about 14, was sort of the time frame where she was in and out of bomb shelters when she was a child. And apparently, from what I understand, is the area where she was living as a child was actually sort of like the train depots where they would load trains. So it was very heavily bombed where she was. And I've asked her a lot of questions over the years, especially during COVID. I asked her quite a few questions. She's still alive. And I think with war, it's so interesting. She's actually the last grandparent that I have living, and she lived to be the oldest because one of the things that she has said often is that she sort of says that, we the people, living today on the planet have no idea really what war is. We wouldn't do very well in it because we're so blessed to have what we have in our luxuries. And I think it gave me a very big understanding of what that is, but it also, I also recognize how durable life can be as well. Life is very powerful and very strong at overcoming. So I think it's all in how you sort of navigate life is sort of my point. And I think that war, we have to ask what war is, and I think the real wars are fought within. So the real wars are fought within, and I've learned this over time. And I think this is the part of our evolution where we're leaping forward in our consciousness. So we're I believe that we're all here for a reason to sort of leap into the new world that is blooming right now, and we've been prepared for it. And that's what I think you're doing in this show. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what would you say to someone who was at that point that they were actually considering suicide that came to you
Mm,
for
mm.
insights, advice?
Well, I think the most important thing to do is to listen. To listen is to love. And I think, and feel actually is a better word to feel. I would feel compassion, and I think and feel that each case would be unique. But I think I certainly would remind them of why and what it means to be a human being. And I have never had that. I've never had that experience, so I actually don't know how I would respond. And I think not knowing's actually okay. I don't know, and I think if I were in that moment, I would have a connection to that soul, and I would try to connect to the soul.
Yeah. I love what you said about you'd remind them what it means to be human. So, what does that look like? What does it mean to be human?
Well, Well, here's the thing. That's the big kahunga question. um, what is life, and what does it mean to be human, and where are we from, and where are we going, and what is this? I think to be a human being, I believe that we are an intergalactic wonder. Um, and I've had some experiences. I'm also a medium. I should mention this. So I'm a medium. I've had many souls come to me all my life from a non-physical body. And when I was a child, I was sort of confused by this because of what the world told me, or what the story was about that, and the shaming of the soul. But I recognize, after my father's transition, when a soul leaves the body, it's kind of like I always say, it's like driving a car. When the soul leaves, there's no more driver. The body just has no more life force, right? So it just stops. So there's no more driver of the car. And when the soul leaves, one of the things that people don't, and a lot of people come to me to just sort of learn about what mediumship is and whatnot, right? So when the soul leaves the body, what's very important is that when we live our life, we have a very important role to play when they go through the veil. And the soul signature doesn't stop. So that signature that knows the soul that you are when they leave the body, that signature is very important. And they're a teacher for you through the veil. So what I recognize that people just often don't do is they don't realize that they can communicate with this soul. And when my father left, he was a great teacher for me to have that. The relationship doesn't stop once the soul leaves. It actually changes and shifts as well. So your understanding of your soul changes as well. And there's a big alchemy that happens, because what it is, it's a remembering that you are no different than that soul, and you have the same intelligence still. So it's a sacred intelligence with a sacred technology that communicates still. So we haven't really sort of been given permission to do this, very often. So to answer your question, to be a human being is really just, actually, I'm a soul, which means I'm eternal. And when you're eternal, there's no end and no beginning. It's just a shift in consciousness, or in paradigm, or in basically, being embodied. So I think it's a beautiful thing to be human, but I think more so it's actually a beautiful thing to be a soul.
Yeah, I'd love to get your perspective on reincarnation, presuming that that's what you embody as teachings. You did mention past lives, so am I correct? Yeah,
Yes, yes, yes,
yes.
yes,
So
definitely.
for people who um, don't know a lot about reincarnation and maybe soul agreements, coming back to Earth with missions and the way we choose our parents or circumstances, experiences. Let's get into this conversation. And the ultimate question is why, are some people born into maybe happy, healthy families, and some children born into, extreme poverty and war, so can you give us first a basic understanding of how the process works when we choose maybe to come and be reincarnated into another life?
Yeah, so here's how I feel. And so I always like to start, this is personally speaking for me. So I would like to just I want to get to a 0 point with anyone watching this. So this is personally speaking for me. So whatever you feel is for you is yours. But this has been my personal experience. So I feel like I'm as old as forever. And what that means is that we live many lives in my personal experience. And I've had a lot of souls that have come to me for many one-on-one readings for mediumship, and also I'm an ascension guide. So I feel very much that I came to this earth to support God, and understanding that the soul, we choose everything that is going on, is how I feel. We choose our parents, we choose our siblings, we actually choose our life, and very much in an omnipresent way. We are very much capable of being omnipresent, is how I feel. And this is something that takes a great amount of, I think, contemplation to sort of navigate. And most people in their lives are very busy making money. They're busy doing things that, are important, of course. But for me, the most important thing has always been that I will leave this planet with knowing that I will not live with a regret so big that I can't look at myself in the mirror. And this is really important to me because for me, and this is the thing that people need to think about what happens after this world, after this life, after this incarnation, because you're very responsible. And I think that, like, well, this time that we're living on earth is that you are capable of doing a life review here embodied. And when you do that, you're very responsible so that you actually can get to a zero point of your karma. And this is a very important conversation in my mind because most people aren't having it. And if you choose not to want to come back to this earth, you have to have a very clean karma. So that's how I feel about it. And I have to tell you, I personally am not sure I want to come back to earth. That's how I feel. I'm not from here. I came to serve, and very much I've done my best for God in it. But that soul, when I'm on the other side of this, outside of this incarnation, I will choose from that space. But I have to tell you, I think that service is the most important thing that anyone can do on this planet, and it has nothing to do with money.
Yes. Yeah, service to others, do you mean?
So, yes.
Service to love.
And when you serve others, you serve yourself.
Yes. Because
So
without
it's
that,
very,
we don't have anything to give, right?
yes. And I think that we need to start having really grown up conversations about that much, much more. And I think and feel that there's no wrong about the way that it's been, by the way. It's needed to be the way that it's been to get to here. But in our evolutionary leaping right now that we're in, this I actually believe deeply and feel deeply that we're incarnated right now with some of the most amazing souls that have ever been, ever, ever in any incarnation. So we're living in a very multi-dimensional, beautiful, quite frankly, blissful possibility. And I think and feel that we were sort of getting a little too advanced in this. And the last 3 years, in my mind, have been to sort of stop this evolutionary process. And our souls basically, I think, have been reduced into a fear space, but actually, that retraction needs to leap us even more forward in it. And that means coming back together again, even stronger.
Yeah.
So
Let's get
that's how I see.
I
Yeah.
love this, Paul. So I'm interested in what you said that we're at the time now when so many, maybe enlightened souls have chosen to reincarnate here. Why is that? What is so special about this time on planet Earth?
Well, it's the changing of the guard, right? So this we're coming out of the dark ages, and this isn't the first time. This is again, personally speaking, for me and my perspective. But I do feel that this time on Earth has been very much, talked about for thousands and thousands of years, and we're at it right now, which means that we're actually the ones to do this, and we are being watched by many, many beings that don't live on this earth right now, and they're here to help us through this time. So we are very supported by our will when we claim our power, actually. And I think this is a time to claim your power, to really give yourself power back. You don't need to always give it to people that don't have your best interest at heart. And it's a time for really taking back your power and making very conscious decisions about conscience.
Mm.
That's kind of how I see it. So the souls that are with us right now, I think you're one of them. I know I'm one of them. And there's many, I mean, there's really only two worlds going on right now, the conscious world and the world that isn't conscious. And the conscious world is getting very, very big, very fast again.
Let's talk about men, as in when they make that shift from service to self to service to others. Did you recognize it in your own journey, or were you always in the space of giving to others? Because I'd like to
No.
personalize this with your journey and then open it up.
Yeah, so I feel and know that I needed to live the life that I lived to get to where I needed to be when my father died. So I was being prepared. for that moment. And I've always known it. I just didn't know that that would be the way, or I didn't know that that was what was going to happen. But I do think that, to answer your question, I was very confused by this world before my father died. I was very confused. I had tried to climb sort of the corporate ladder, making money, like being successful, all the boring stuff that, everybody I think that is spiritual has done some version of that. And I'm not unique. I did all of that stuff. But I also had some really profound moments when I was a child that were very obvious to me. And I didn't realize how much in blessing I had been so blessed to do the things that I did when I was a child, to, I think, become the man that I am, the soul that I am as a man. So I think just, that particular time is such a confusing thing when you finally wake up to who you really are. And then you have to almost re-establish the connection to the sacred technology within you. And once you do, it all comes together to make this beautiful bloom. And I'm still working on myself that way, so I'm not done.
So, how do you connect with the sacred technology within? I love that terminology.
Yeah, so I've been shown a lot of things. So um, the first thing that I would say is when my father died, I remember someone offering me drugs. When somebody in my family, an aunt, actually suggested I take little blue pills, and I was like, no, that doesn't feel right. I didn't want to mask my grief, so I was having these profound experiences with God, and one of the things that God showed me right away first is that heaven is through your heart. So the gates of heaven are your heart, and you must open them yourself. They cannot be opened by anyone else. And the only way to get to heaven is actually through your heart. And this was a message from God for me and to tell others. And we need to start recognizing that the heart has been so protected by the conditioning of the world. And you have to reach and stretch the heart open, and you have to do it in order to actually ascend. And if you wish to connect your sacred technology comes from the core. You feel everything here, right? It's this the core of you. Cœur in French is heart, and it's right in the center of your being. So I think what's really interesting is when you start understanding the energy that comes from it. It's the life sustainer, and when you live with that as your compass, your life is very designed to be very different than the one that's from here. So if you live from your heart, my God basically said to me, you have to live from your heart. And I was someone that lived in a great amount of fear. I was very programmed into fear, scared of many things that were, in my mind, actually almost ridiculous when I look at them now. But I started to follow my heart. And when you follow your heart, the universe is very much there to support your growth as a soul. And it's all these alignments start happening, and it shifts everything where you're living this totally different altered reality than you ever thought possible. So that's the sacred technology, and it all begins with opening your heart. The fifth dimension, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, this is so good. You're speaking my language.
Yeah, it's very true.
All right, let's talk to men. I mean, this is great. We can talk about all the words, all the poetry, all the songs to do this, but what men are practical? What are the practical steps that men can shift into this heart energy while still retaining their masculinity?
Mm. Well, I think that everything comes down to honesty. So the truth, the light, and the way. Those are the three principles. And I think the practical part is you have to, as a man, admit that you're an emotionally intelligent being. And if you don't, you will live a very unfulfilled life. And I say this with great humility and also great compassion, because I think being a man has been very indoctrinated to be strong in a way that is physical strength. This is not good for us. It is not one dimensional. So physical strength is a part of being a man, but it certainly isn't what's fulfilling. And I love listening to one of my favorite sort of conversations is always if you're ever with someone that's dying, as a priest, when I was in my seminary, we had many different people come in and speak. And one of the things that I remember when we were dealing with transition, um, one of the things that I really remember reading and studying was when priests or ministers are with people when they're transitioning, there's sort of two stories. There's the person that dies with a smile on their face, and then there's the people that die with anguish. And they're very different experiences, and there's really either one or the other. So people that die with a smile on their face have no regrets and they live a fulfilled life from the heart. People that die in anguish haven't fulfilled their life, and they feel like they haven't completed their mission. And this is very interesting to me, and I think that we don't talk about death very often, but it's very important because if you think about it logically, we're all going to go through a transition of some kind. It may not be the way that we think it might be, but I do think that it's an important part of being a man and or a woman. And I think that it means what it means to your heart and your soul. And if we want to get to that space at the end of our life to feel fulfilled, we have to think about it while we're alive living. And we have to make a commitment to reach and stretch out into the world so that we get some fulfillment back too, from the inside out. So to be a man, I think, is to be able and willing to talk about, I think, your emotional being and what that is. And we guard, men shame other men for not being manly enough, women shame men for not being manly enough, and it's all a bunch of bullshit. Because really, we are all very much insecure with who we truly are in some capacity, and we've been very cruel to ourselves. So in order to really ascend out of that deep, like almost the sludge that is, we have to lift up into who we really are, and that's being our highest self and manifest. So this is sort of, this doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman either. It's really because you're your soul.
Yeah. So I love that what you said, connecting and speaking about emotions. Are there any sort of spiritual tools, practices that helped you actually, connect to that heart space?
Yeah, I would actually say so. Before my father died, I was not a meditator. I'd read many, many things about meditation, and it wasn't foreign to me. I certainly tried before my dad died, long before. Um, but the thing that happened when my dad died, I no longer cared about praying at all. I didn't care about praying anymore. I cared about meditating, and I used to make sacred circles of crystals. I don't even know why I did this, but I would make sacred circles of crystals around my body, and I would make a space large enough that I could lay flat on the ground. I liked laying flat on the ground to meditate. I needed my entire surface area of my back to be on the ground, and I would put my third eye into the sun. So through the window, I would find that spot, make a circle, and I would literally just drink in God. And I have to tell you, that meditation of just drinking in God was the best thing that I ever did, because what it did is it opened up the entire channel of the sacred technology. And I think that I always say that God has a very bad press agent. And I think that we're the new press agents for God. It's sort of my feeling. So I think meditation is very much the highway in for me, and prayer is the highway out for me. So my spiritual practice is really praying to God and bringing God into me as my meditation.
Yeah, this is great. And I love that, meditation is always so unique. It's
It
actually the
is.
thing that I love this sacred technology term that you use, so connected me with my sacred technology too. 4 months after daily meditation, my writing poetry started flowing through. So big advocate for meditation. And it has come up probably in at least half the conversations, probably 2/3 of the conversations we've had in Heart Warriors. And I love that most men have got their unique flair. It's like, you said you tried it, but then when you're at that point where you just, I guess, some form of surrender after your
Yeah.
dad's passing, that you found your own way to meditate that worked for you and connect with God. That's really powerful. Have you got anything else to say around that?
Well, I think, like I know very much that we oftentimes look externally for everything, but one of the things that I recognized when my father died is the answers from within you. And I think if you just it's so interesting once you sort of know this stuff, in the Bible it says the kingdom of heaven is within, or the kingdom of God is within you. And I would I would even add through a child's heart. I think it's interesting and very appropriate that we're children first. There's no mistake in that divine design. You're a child first so you can remember that that's actually who you are. And for those first 7 years of your life, you didn't have the world in you. And then the world got into you. And the most important thing you can do is get the world out of you and be who you were before the world got in you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, so good. That's great. Prayer. How would you explain prayer and how it works?
Well, there's a couple of things maybe with prayer that's unique. First of all, there's individual prayer, which is very different. That's its own thing. Um, that's sort of where you can connect to the most sacred part of you, the most holy space within you, and connect with God, Source, Universe, whatever name you, the Beloved, Creator, Spirit. But where you are with that conscious level with yourself, and you pray for something, that's its own thing. But then there's group prayer, which is very different. And group prayer is much more a collective vibration. And in that collective vibration, there's, I mean, you can move a lot of things with that prayer. So it's even measurable now energetically. I mean, we have the tools to measure even what can happen on the other side of the planet when people are praying for others. And I think that we need to do a better job of not being at war with each other, because when we come together and use our energies constructively in that way, intentionally, things are very powerfully changed. And I think, if you even think of a country, the reason why a country exists is because it's a collective body of souls. So we need to start thinking this way when we come together in peace and in respect. The namaste, I honor the universe in you because I know you honor the universe in me. Something happens. And then when you use that energy together in prayer or intentional, work in energy, then that's very specific. So that's sort of prayer to me.
Yeah, I love how you brought this into the quantum realm, the metaphysical realm, because it's one thing that, oh yeah, pray to God, or to whoever you want to pray to, but it's like, well, how does that actually work? It's all based on just a belief of a programming, but to bring it down into the metaphysics and the quantum mechanical field, that's powerful. So through energy, the power of prayer, collective prayer, how it can, through the raising of the frequency, actually affect something, even on the other side of the world. Is there anything else you want to say around that conversation, Paul?
Yeah, so the only thing that I feel that I meant to sort of say right now, and I feel this is very much from a message outside of myself that's greater than I, but is that God dwells within you as you. And you have to really wrap your head around what that means. You're literally a piece of God. So it only makes sense to understand the holiness of that. And it begins with worth. So I just think, remember how important you are, how powerful you are, because you are literally made of the same thing that we talk of as God. And not many people are willing to talk about it that way, but we need to become much more willing to say it. And I think the sooner we embody that, we will do a much better job at taking care of this beautiful planet.
Yeah, so you're a minister, and a reverend, I believe. So
Yeah.
of how did you describe it? Like no one faith, it's all the.
Yeah,
Can you
so it's
can you
interfaith minister.
describe
It's
it,
not,
please?
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm an interfaith minister,
Okay.
and which means that I honor all paths. I went to the oldest interfaith seminary in the world, and it's very important to me that it includes even the atheist. And usually, I can't always say always, but usually atheists believe in science. So science and atheism tend to be hand in hand, and there's always a nature component usually. So I just think that it's important to not exclude someone that doesn't believe in, some version of creation as well. That's fine. So I honor all paths, and really, ultimately, it's the soul. It's some aspect of the soul that is what I'm willing to honor always. And I think that people understand something energetic is within them. So it begins with even just that. So I'm an interfaith minister to honor that.
Yeah, and I've got to ask this question because I love that you can just broaden it and, sort of accept everyone. But I mean, there's a faith, a religion, a following, I guess, that's Satanism. I mean, where does that come into your inclusion of all faiths?
Well, this is a conversation I've not had, at least not publicly as well. So that's interesting. So for me, I would say that that's something that I probably would have to say would be a zero to me. I wouldn't even be interested in it for one reason is it would rule out God, what God is to me, and that's the beauty of support. So I think for me it's a zero.
Yeah, no, good answer. Yeah, yeah. So I just I don't come with a list of questions
That's
usually.
okay.
It's just like,
I'm glad you asked me in a way like I can say that out loud and yeah, that's good.
yeah, great. I'm sure we'll get back into this God and consciousness and awareness, but there was one question that, if I may, I wanted to ask you to wrap up the conversation around grief, because you were there with your mother, and obviously it's such a oh gosh, energetically mind-blowing situation. But how did you deal with your own grief? Did you have to put your mum first and sort of be the strong one for her, to give her priority to be able to collapse emotionally while you held the fort? Or how does that play out as a man when maybe you've got to feel that, you've got to reserve your own dealing of grief for the people around you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that one. So one of the things that I would say, what happened for us is, I'll tell you a little part of this story that is very interesting to me. So I was not public at all when my father died, and I didn't know this was going to happen, where I would become this person that I am. I'm a musician, and I write music to inspire global love and kindness. So all of this stuff is a result of. Um, but the thing that's very interesting with my mother is that there was actually my husband, my mother, and myself. My sister lives in Australia, so really our immediate was me, my mother, and my husband, and we were created sort of like a collective force together of understanding. And what's very interesting is that we did this together. So it wasn't really, there wasn't a me or a her or a him. It was just, we came together with this understanding that we needed to heal together. And we all experienced this profound, um, you know, one of the things that people don't realize is when one soul is no longer in a family, every dynamic changes in the immediate family and the external family, like that. And people, because my father was a male, very, very alpha, very, very strong man, very not afraid of his power, not afraid of his words, very dominant, very beautiful that way. And, very earth went fishing and very much of the earth. And, he fed people. His job was always working in food and feeding people. So he's very dynamic and knew lots of people, did lots of business. And so, anyways, when one person that's powerful leaves the tribe, so to speak, it changed everything. And what was really interesting is the predatorial sort of aspect of all these people that were kind of in check because of him, because he was a protector. They all started to come at us differently. So people were almost taking advantage of our emotional weakness at the time, which was very weird to me. So it was a restructuring of understanding the tribe. And I don't think that people really look at their families that way, but when somebody dies that's a parental figure, the tribe changes and you have to sort of assimilate and navigate in a different way. So I think what happened is my mother, Corey, my husband, and myself became a new tribe. and we had to sort of protect ourselves from actually the external world, including family. And we had to sort of do that as a nucleus first. And I think that most people don't really talk about, um, I think, death that way. I've never heard a conversation like that myself.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, your question prompted me to realize it. And I've thought of it, but that's exactly what happened. And all these years later, so we're 13 years, since that time pretty much now, we're in our 13th year. And we've all really come out of it actually much more beautiful, actually, I think.
Mm. So,
Yeah.
your final words on dealing with grief. What advice have you got for people who are dealing with grief?
Well, it's a really big space. Grief is personal. So it's an opportunity and a blessing, actually. I would actually say grief is a blessing because to have loved someone so much is actually the blessing. And what one has to do is navigate how one can still love them, how to do that, and how to be who you are. And I think that grief, what oftentimes happen is people just want to be busy and not deal with grief, so they get busy. My suggestion would be that grief will chase you if you don't deal with it. And I remember, grief is a process. I still have moments where I grieve my father, but it's very different. You know, I always call it like a hurricane. So you're in the center of the hurricane when death happens like that, when transition happens, and you slowly get away from it. And the irony, I will say this, I miss the space where I was when my father died because it was the first time I actually didn't take the world personally. And it's the first time because I was in such a survival mode, I actually felt like I've never been more me in my grief because I didn't care about actually serving anyone except myself. And it was almost like this blessing where I, for the first time in my life, was given permission to love myself that much. And that was what my grief became, and where I actually changed. Instead of not really loving myself, I started to love myself and answer my own heart instead of becoming all the people that people wanted me to be. And I started becoming who I am. Yeah.
Those depths of grief bring you closer to the heart space and to God.
Yes, I believe that deeply. And I think people get really scared when they're dark. And I think that grief is a darkness, but I think it's meant to be. And I think it's the divine design that it is that. But most people, because it's so emotional, have never felt so much emotion, so they get scared of feeling that much. So what people want to do is almost turn the tap off to that feeling. And you can do lots of things. A lot of people drink more. A lot of people, will do drugs, or a lot of people will go on, you know crazy work sort of modes. But I think ultimately, if you can allow yourself to just know that it will end, it won't last forever. It will shift and move. Let people know that it's actually organic. It's an organic process. It's very much a cleansing. So I think just to understand, when you experience grief, it's not unique. It's written into the codex of life for a reason, the way that it's meant to be, for it to offer something that nothing else can. And it's a sacred and holy time for the soul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's get into your music, Paul. I could continue that conversation for a long time, but I want to get into your music because I know it's such a big piece of your life and your gift to the world. So,
Thank
how did you get into it? What was the journey to actually now with focusing on, such conscious, heart opening, connecting to source, to God music?
Okay, so I was in music all my life, up until the time I was probably around 20. So I sort of was a gifted kid. I was noticed for my musical abilities, my musical gift. So I was always sort of ushered into these, kind of enriched programs with music. And I thought that I would become a singer when I was about 20. And I almost what would happen is I could always write a song. I was always writing songs, but from the time I can remember, and I could always write a half of a song, but I could never finish one. And I used to have these moments with God where I used to get really frustrated and be really annoyed because I just didn't know how to end a song. And the messages would come. So I always receive messages. My inner awareness is very sharp. And the message that would come to me, and I didn't understand this at the time, but I get it now, would be that you need to go and live life to write the songs and the music that you will write. So I got very frustrated, in my early, probably around 2021, and I left music and I was done with it. Actually, I had done enough. I had given my all to it. And so I listened to that message and just kind of washed my hands of it. And then when my dad died, I was guided by God to sit down at the piano for the first time in a very long time. And music just started flooding through and I started writing songs nonstop. And the whole songs, I knew it's like they were visions that were just so clear. And then, sort of what was interesting is God asked me to do this publicly, and I said no. I said no way. And so I denied it for a while. And then I realized there was no way that I could ever deny that from God. So I started to sort of become public with it. And my music started to sort of make ripples in the world. And I would have, various conversations with people all over the world from the music that people found. And I used to burn CDs and give them out for free to many people as guided from my heart. And it just started making these ripples in the world. And then what's really interesting about music, because it comes from the inside of you, it creates the outside world experience sometimes. And then you would experience your heart manifested in someone else's sort of heart. So we don't think, I never thought like that about music, but from the writer of conscious, loving music that supports the heart and the soul, then somebody else experiences that and then they change because of something you did from your heart and they recognize their heart. And then something happens and manifest. And so I started witnessing these huge moments where I realized that my heart was on the outside of my body. And I kind of think that that's what heaven is when we all kind of do that.
Hmm. This is powerful. So do you write lyrics? Do you like do lyrics as well, or just music? Not
No,
just
no, no,
music,
no.
but
Yeah.
just understand. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I do lyrics with music more so than not. Most of my music is with lyrics, yes.
Yeah. So when the lyrics come through you, because being a poet, I like to understand the process with other people as well. How does that happen for you? Does it like do you get a feeling? Do you sit down, say I'm going to write a song, or does the song write itself through you?
So everyone has a different process. For me, my process is really opening my entire heart to God and letting God come through me. And I would actually not even take credit for it. It's God. It has nothing to do with me. I'm a vessel. So I think my writing style is really surrendering to God and being of service. So I always have a notepad by the piano when I write, and a song will just come to me. It's quite magical, really. And it starts with a melody, and then the words just fill in the blanks.
Is it like, are you writing about your own experiences as Paul, or does it come through? It might not have anything to do with what's going on in your life at the moment.
I think that so here's the thing with my work is so I'm an ascension guide. So what that means, first of all, let me qualify it and quantify it. So my job is to support the heart and the soul to ascend to be the highest self and manifest. So first of all, music is so misunderstood. It's a sacred technology. It's been around forever, and music has been indoctrinated and disgustingly and horrendously used as an industry that's gross, in my opinion, because it's the one thing that's sacred from within a soul vibrationally that then goes, it's one of the only things that can get into another soul. in that space of holy sacred technology. So when someone writes a song without honoring that soul from a soul perspective, it's almost like in many ways it's just not conscious. So when it's conscious with God, it is the most sacred thing to be in another human being, and that's a very big responsibility. So my music, when it gets into the sacred technology of another life, it is done in a way that's very cared for. So for me, I don't even know what your question was, aside from just knowing that I think the music of tomorrow needs to be conscious. And when it is, it changes the vibrational understanding between two souls that have respect for each other. And people can feel it because it bypasses the brain, all the programs. It goes right to the heart.
Yeah, I was going to say, what is like the power of music? I mean, a song can give you goosebumps. I mean, whether it or not, it does have an emotional connection or not, so there's obviously something energetic going on. And we do know that, the music industry has been hijacked,
Oh,
and
yeah.
songs and the frequency of songs, the natural, is it 434 hertz was hijacked, and which is the natural resonance of the body. It was hijacked to another frequency, which puts it not in resonance with the body on purpose. So there's all that. Go into this topic if you know more about it, and let people
Sure.
know how music was hijacked, and now bringing it back to conscious music, the importance of that, because it's a frequency thing, isn't it?
So here's the way that I look. A lot of people, I've actually done a lot of reflection about the frequencies. So first of all, I don't feel like there's a wrong frequency, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about this. So I actually am not a I have no problem with the A440 is what a piano's tuned to in the traditional sense. That being said, I am completely open to understanding that if a piano's tuned or instruments are tuned to that 432, it might actually be more beautiful. But I don't think there's a wrong way in this because it's sort of like color. It's zero to, like all the colors are beautiful. So I don't think that there's any frequency in a piano or in notes that are wrong, actually. So that's I want to just sort of say that. I made a choice to do the A440 because I actually love it. As an ascension guide, I love a double digit. It's 44. It's very powerful. So that 44 is very beautiful. And I think it's all in your heart's discernment of it. So I personally love the A440, and I think it's a gorgeous number. It is actually a double digit. So I love it for that reason. There's also 88 piano keys on a piano. I love that.
Mhm.
So 88, it's all in your own heart's discernment, but those are double infinity signs. Like that's gorgeous. So I love that a piano has 88 keys, and I love that the A440 is a double digit.
Yeah. And I mean, when you're in tune with your body, I mean, literally the word in tune, you can feel what music resonates, what music opens you, or what music closes you. So it's all about that feeling, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think, just to put a little, did you know Louise Hay's work? I'm
Yes.
just curious. Yeah.
Yes.
So my song My Heart was used to honor her life. And I'm very humbly sort of proud of that because I feel that, you know, there's 8 billion people on the planet. That's a lot of incarnation here. And when you think of the fact that someone that didn't think that they could sing or write a song, which is what I used to be, had a song that was used to honor a woman that believed in self-love ultimately. The fact that my music was used for her life, and she didn't just that wasn't just that moment, but she actually transitioned listening to my music.
Oh,
And these are things that I think for me are so amazing to prove that when you follow your heart, miracles that you didn't even know could happen can happen for you,
mhm.
whatever they may be to you. Whatever the miracle is, it's for the person that's creating from their heart. But I think that this is the thing that we need to be much more willing to talk about. And I love music for showing it so well that you can manifest. And poetry, your poetry would be the same. When people have an experience with their soul, that is heaven. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that connection. It's so do you write to bring pleasure to yourself or to write to bring pleasure to other people?
So the way I look at music, so I have the hard part about doing what I do is the music that I was experiencing with God was so intimate with me and God that I had to share that with the world. And music, because it's art, is very capable of being judged. So I feel like it's one of those things where I surrendered to being willing to share my spiritual connection with God openly with the world, which is the most intimate thing I've ever had in my life, my music with God. And so when I when I put it out into the world, what happened is people started having experiences with God.
Mm.
And then it's not about me, it's about service.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I mean, we'll always get onto all your links at the end. We still got half an hour left, but just at this point, we need to let people know where they can find your music.
Sure.
So please let us know.
Sure. So you can go to Spotify. I'm on iTunes. All of the majors, at least at this point. I might change this in the future, but right now everything's on Spotify, iTunes. But you can go to my website for the quick links. Also on YouTube, but it's www.beekindness.com. So like the bumblebee, and bekindness.com.
Oh, that's so good. And we'll drop all the links below, but I just wanted to make sure because obviously that flows on
Sure. Yeah. No. No. That's great.
conversation. Is there anything else you want to say about your music before we move on, Paul?
No, I think, I just think and feel that music is something that I think realistically the only thing that I would say is my music is really an ascension opportunity for the soul. And it's an opportunity. One of the suggestions I would actually say, if you're listening to my music, if you go back to any of the earlier albums and if you go in sequential order, but using earbuds or headphones to isolate and closing your eyes and using it as a meditation space of going within your soul, I think closing off the eye stimulation really helps to open up the heart. So when you close one sense, the others open up more. So I would suggest isolating the noise, so that you don't have distraction, and allowing you to sort of give permission to yourself to go inside of your heart when you listen. And it's very powerful if you do it sort of as a spiritual almost process, so you can actually experience the inner landscape of you.
Oh, I love this. I'll definitely be looking up your music later on
Yeah.
today for sure. All right, let's move on, Paul. What's your definition of masculinity?
Oh boy. Okay. Well, so here's the thing with um, masculinity and femininity. So I'd like to add a word, divine masculine.
Okay.
And that's very different than masculinity to me. So divine masculine and divine feminine we have in all of us. So I feel that true divine masculinity is a balance of divine masculine and divine feminine, and having both in a balance. So I actually feel that they go together.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so what's the difference in your definition between masculinity and divine masculinity?
So masculinity, I would actually say, is man-made, and
Oh,
I don't subscribe to that at all. I think that divine masculinity is where you are actually a sacred being, and I think that the masculine side of you is all of the male part, but it's from the perspective that it isn't better than female at all, and so it is in balance where we have this whole, it's just really a label if you think about it. If you just stand back from it, it's a label. So it's becoming whole with your soul. And that means that it's more the soul than either of those two things, actually. And it means that you're willing to basically be the truth, the light, and the way, your honesty, what is really going on without restrictions or fear of any persecution.
So I'm interested in the qualities of divine masculinity because, as we going into this ascension process, and so many men are now on their healing journey and awareness that maybe, they have been holding on to things that didn't serve them. So when we narrow it down, what would you label as being the qualities of a divine masculinity? And I mean, I know there's femininity too, the divine feminine in a man, but what qualities are men aspiring to?
Well, I think, one of the things right off the bat is to love powerfully. And I think to love, so I always like to go back to courage. And Dr. Maya Angelou is one of my greatest spiritual teachers. And she always said, the most important virtue is courage, because without courage, you can't have the power to love. You can't have the power to do all of the other virtues. So the first thing is courage. I think that with courage, you're willing to actually show up, to have a voice for love. And what is that voice, or what does that look like and manifest? It means being willing to say something that needs to be said in right action. So it doesn't mean that it would be popular. It doesn't mean that you won't be persecuted. It means that you'll stand up for love and be powerful in doing so because it's right and you know it in your soul. So that would be one big one.
And I love that, courage. Well, in Italian, heart is cuore. So,
Right.
it's the root of that word, pretty sure in French and probably Latin, it's the
Oh,
same, but
sure.
it's all connected.
Everything.
It's all that heart energy. So,
Yeah.
the cuore, courage, it's all the same word. So, yeah, I love that. Okay, so when we're balancing the divine masculine and the divine feminine within the individual man, what are the healthy divine feminine qualities that we need to bring in to balance this courage to love? Or is that the
I think that
balance?
I think that it's interchangeable, and I think women actually, in many ways, have had to sort of endure much more. I think pushback with identity roles. Um, so I think that in many ways, the female is first of all. I always like to remind people that a male. It kind of bothers me when people forget that it takes a male sperm to make the egg bloom, So this is sort of a funny little thing that I think women oftentimes actually forget. Yes, you can give life, but it must be together, right? So the thing that I think is really important is that women actually hold life within them for, the 9 months. So this is a very important part of divine femininity from that perspective of being the being that can actually grow life within the womb. And I think that that's probably the most profound, miraculous thing. So, to go back to the divine masculine, I would like to honor the fact that men actually have a role to play in actually, impregnating that womb.
Yeah.
And without that, it can't exist. And that's the most amazing thing that can happen on Earth. So, I think to add those things together is important.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, I mean, anyone that denies that is, yeah, crazy. Yeah. I've always seen the masculine having a very important role to play with that too. And of course, it all happens on an energetic level. Just because the feminine is carrying the baby physically doesn't mean that the man cannot be there energetically with all his beautiful, courageous love and, protection and other aspects. Yeah, great
Yeah.
point, Paul.
And I also think, I one of the things wanted to mention earlier was water and the power of water.
Mm,
So we hold frequency in water. Water holds frequency, it vibrates, right? And I mean, just if you ever look at, water when you have it in sort of like maybe a Tibetan bowl and you cling the bowl and it vibrates, we are capable, you might not see it when you look at water that's within us, but it's vibrating and it holds frequency. So I think one of the things just to point out, like men give so much energy just by their aura into the baby as well. And there's this whole energy when two souls sleep together. That energy is very powerful. So I think, just to remember that you may not see with the eyes what's going on, but so much, metaphysical energy is happening all the time around the baby.
Yes, yes. Love that, Paul. Well said. I know we had that little break, but I think we've got about 15 minutes left. What else needs to be brought into this conversation, Paul, from your experience and your teachings regarding men, masculinity, the human journey?
Well, I think one of the things that I wanted to talk about today, and I always like to go back to this, is that we're creators
Mm,
and we're co-creating life here. So that means it's responsible. So one of the things I always like to remind people is that words have power, and there is sort of this teaching from Maya Angelou that is very important, is that one day we'll be able to measure the amount of power each word has. And, words get in walls, they get in clothing, they get into carpets and upholstery, and then they get into us. So when we choose words that we use, we need to become responsible at actually putting them out. When you use good words and they go out into the world, they create things. So I believe that it's very important to be responsible for the words we choose to use and how we use them, and we are responsible for that. So that's one thing I just wanted to sort of say out loud. And the other thing is that, as creators, we need to remember that we are very powerful at creating this world. And when you become conscious in your intentional creation, I think and feel and know that it creates the life that you experience. And I think we're living in a time where actually I think it's important to make sure that we teach our children that, and that the only way to really effectively do that is to model it. So we need to become very good teachers to children on how creation works, and the importance and the power and the responsibility of what that really is, because it will affect this world, and we have not done a great job at creating so far. And I think that we're starting to understand that when we work together in synergies, in that way, in co-creation, then we can really almost, I would like to, the word terraform or change the world much more quickly and much more effectively, using energies constructively with knowledge instead of destructively.
yeah.
So that's one of my please do that action.
No, I love this, and I'm all for this, especially, you'd know it in your songwriting. Sometimes you've got a choice of two words in the English language, but if you're like me, you can feel which one has the higher frequency. And, there's certain words that we use, especially when we're talking about the metaphysical divine realm. That's my experience anyway. And the
That's
fact that
beautiful.
you're bringing up the power of words, I'm guessing that you feel it as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think you just said that so eloquently. Thank you. Yeah, you said.
Thing. Let's talk about ascension and where humanity's heading. We'll wrap this up with why we're here on Earth at this time. Where do you see us being as a collective in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years, in 50 years? What's
Well,
the plan?
I feel very much that we're in this time. I had to move my leg, sorry. We're in this time, I feel that we're becoming very much galactic. I um I think that we're at that precipice of actually making contact much more effectively. And I think that we are in this massive, beautiful universe where we are not the only. It's so funny, like so egoic of us to think we're alone, which I know none of us, I'm guessing none of us that would come to this, tuning in moment with each other in your realm would actually feel that, but you never know. But I do believe that we're in this time of contact, and I feel that we are sort of the ones that we've been waiting for, and we're sort of from the future, but we came back to incarnate to experience this so that we can bridge to that. And that's sort of, I mean, I've had one experience with a UFO, so to speak, and it was before I woke up, so to speak. And it was a moment where I feel very much like they saw me, I saw them, and it was a moment of omnipresence. And I feel very much that we're in this. I'm going to Sedona actually. I'm singing there in June. Sorry, July 29th and the 30th with Dr. Bruce Lipton. And I'm excited to go there because I've heard that you can see many ships there. So I'm looking forward to it.
I'd love to have Dr. Bruce Lipton on the show.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. He would talk to you. He's
I'm looking
lovely.
for someone special for number 100 because we've only got about 14 episodes to go, and I've got about half of those scheduled in. So I might have to see if I can reach out to him.
Oh, he's wonderful. I love Bruce. He's wonderful. Yes.
Yeah, oh, that's so good. Paul, well, first of all, we'll drop all your links up. We'll wrap up now. So we've spoken about your music. What about other links? What other services do you offer around, ascension and teachings and ministry? Where can people
Yes.
find you?
Yeah, so I've actually, one of the things I'm going to be doing, I will share, I'm going to be doing a retreat in Bermuda. One of the things I really feel about Bermuda is there's so much energy here that's very specific. So I had an experience here in the womb of God in the water when I was healing in 2012. And I feel that Bermuda, sort of this energy of this triangle on the planet is very important and it connects to the other side of the earth as well. And I think that we're in this huge understanding of energy. So this is sort of the future, is all about energy. So I'm very interested in holding some retreats. I think giving people the experience of going within their soul from a very different. I've been to many retreats and I know what I feel resonated and I know what didn't in many times that I've been invited to them. So I really want to sort of come up with a programmed sort of understanding of how to do that with music, how to do that with nature walks, and how to do that with sort of meditation from a walking perspective. And also, I feel that it's time to come together as collectives. So I'm bringing people to Bermuda to do some retreats, and I'm starting that actually next March. So March 2024, and there's already a huge number of people that have signed up to come from all over the world. So I think it will be a way for people to come together in a community sort of way. So I'm really interested in building community. And I also have a light worker, the International Light Workers Gathering, which is once a month that I do for free. Um, so if you go to my website, there's an email address. You can send me an email if you're interested in that. And I'm also on Facebook. So if you ever wanted to communicate with me, just go on Facebook and feel free to do so. That would be all that I want to say. Yeah.
Oh, that wonderful. Thank you, Paul. We'll drop all those links below. So I'd like to ask you now for a final message to men that are maybe struggling and, just sort of coming into an awareness that they want to make some changes in their lives, or then they not sure how to go forward. What would you say to those men?
Well, first of all, I think the most important part is that you're very important. You are here, you got here for a reason. And if you're watching this right now, you're actually watching this because you're destined to. And that's how important you are, and that's how loved you are, that this moment could be for you. And I think that just the fact that that could happen is incredible. So, to really honor yourself for having been seeking something and finding something that actually is important to you, and to recognize that life is a journey, which means you have to sort of live it to understand where it's going to go. And I always like to remind people, and I try to remind myself of this as well, is there's always the one side of the coin, but there's always the other side, and you can't see it if you're looking just at one side. You have to turn it over, and you have to get to the point where you see the other side. And life is sort of like that. There's sort of two sides to it. The double-edged sword maybe is a good analogy, but you have to get to the other side, and it's meant to be a mystery so that you get to untangle the mess that sort of has to come together to be untangled. And the only one that can do that is you. So to just have faith in the journey and to know that it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
Great message. Thank you so much, Paul. I've loved this conversation. This is right up my
Yes, yes.
alley.
Me too. Me too. Beautiful. Thank you for your service too. I mean, I can't. I've watched a few of your videos just to sort of check out what you're doing, and I can't say thank you enough. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you so much, Paul. Well, we'll definitely be in touch. I'll get this up. If you could like, share, subscribe for sure. Check out Paul's music and come into that beautiful space of the heart, the gateway to heaven. You got me all teary when you were talking about about that because it resonates so strongly.
It's beautiful, and I think the other thing is just putting your hand on your heart and just saying "I love you" to yourself. I mean, so powerful, so beautiful. Thank you for all you do.
Definitely. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. I'll be back in a few days with another episode of Heart Warriors. Bye. You stay on, please, Paul.